first, and my name is Susan Bossy. I am a director of workforce program development here at CareerSource, Florida. I have worked with and overseen registered apprenticeship expansion across the CareerSource Florida network for the past 4 years. And in that capacity, I have helped to coordinate the efforts of the apprenticeship navigators at now each of our 21 local workforce development boards. And of course, you all know your apprenticeship navigator is Dorian Lund. She's been there for quite a while and is extremely knowledgeable. And we really appreciate all the work that she does and your entire board do to support registered apprenticeships. Again, we do this training program because each year we request some funding for the support of apprenticeship navigators at each of our local workforce boards from our CareerSource Florida board. And each year we have certain things that we say we're going to be able to do because of this funding. And one of those things, and the most important thing, is really just expanding the knowledge to employers and to job seekers about the many benefits of registered apprenticeships. And in that effort, we provide training across the state to apprenticeship navigators and all of their teams on various topics about apprenticeship expansion. And this year we committed to providing just a basic training. So everyone that has an interest in learning more about apprenticeships, so that you can talk to your employers, you can talk to your job seekers when you go out into the community, you have some general knowledge. So we committed this year to provide this training to each of the 21 local workforce boards. So Catherine and I, for the most part, have been either going across the state or providing this training virtually like we are today, just as a very basic introduction of what apprenticeship is, how does it work, and then what our role is as the CareerSource Florida Network. So with that being said, that's why we're here today. We appreciate all of you joining us today. I am actually going to turn it over to Catherine to both introduce herself. Catherine is the State Director of Apprenticeship for the Florida Department of Education. And she's been doing this for several years as well. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Catherine, to both introduce yourself and also get the program started. And then we will take questions either kind of in the middle, Catherine, if that's okay with you. So raise your hand if you have a question, or you can type it in the chat box, or we can wait till the end to do questions. Whatever's most comfortable for the attendees is what we're hoping to accomplish here. So, Catherine, I turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me. My name is Catherine Wheeler, and I serve as the Director of Apprenticeship for the state of Florida. I do have an ATR vacancy in your region right now, but I will have that soon. So in the meantime, I am acting as your ATR. Doreen has been sending me lots of great leads. I just spoke yesterday with one of the companies she has been working with, and so I'm filling in the meantime, but you will have someone soon, and I'm sure you will just love this ATR. So we'll start out with talking about what are registered apprenticeships. What are they? How does it work? How do you develop a registered apprenticeship program? Who can become a sponsor of one and actually registering a program? And then Susan will take it over to talk about expanding registered apprenticeship in Florida and CareerSource's role. So what is registered apprenticeship? It is an employer-driven education and training solution that provides structured on-the-job training and instruction to apprentices for a specific occupation that culminates in a nationally recognized and portable completion certificate that is issued by the Florida Department of Education, where I work. Susan, I think you're driving. Okay, great, thanks. So apprenticeship, we typically think of as being an education and training model that serves the construction industry, but we are seeing that expand across industries. We're seeing a lot more healthcare industry in apprenticeship, as well as manufacturing, trade and logistics, IT, energy, hospitality. It's all across the board. So registered apprenticeship is an employer-driven process. You cannot have a registered apprenticeship program without an employer that enables employers to develop and apply industry-recognized standards to training with the intention of increasing productivity, improving quality of the workforce, retaining company knowledge, reducing turnover, and it affords the apprentice the opportunity to fast track their career goals, avoid debt, earn competitive wages, and access a career pathway. I like to say there are 5 main components of registered apprenticeship program. One is that business involvement where you've got an employer. 2 is the structured on-the-job training, and that's where most of the instruction takes place through competencies learned hands-on. An apprenticeship program can be anywhere from a year to 4 or 5 years long, depending on the occupation. There's related technical instruction that is provided to supplement that on-the-job training. And related technical instruction is at least 144 hours per year. And it can be provided by the employer. It can be provided through a technical college or a community college. It can be web-based learning. There's so many different modalities for that. There are always rewards for skills gained. An apprentice is an employee from day one, and they earn a progressive wage schedule, so they know when they're going to have wage increases throughout their term in the apprenticeship. And last but not least, there is an occupational credential signed by the Florida Department of Education, indicating that this person is prepared for the occupation that they were trained in. So there's a lot of different entities within registered apprenticeship. There are registered apprenticeship sponsors, and the sponsor is responsible for administering all aspects of the registered apprenticeship program. They run it, they operate it, and they manage it. A registered apprenticeship sponsor could be a group of employers or just an employer. And so that would be a registered apprenticeship employer. And that's the employer that has a registered set of standards based on their employment needs, and they hire apprentices in those positions. A participating employer would be a business entity that is actively engaged through its own employees in the actual work of the occupation that's being apprenticed. They employ, hire, and pay the apprentice and journey worker. They evaluate the apprentice, and they either have a signed collective bargaining agreement or a signed participating employer agreement form with that program sponsor. Then there's the related technical instruction provider. Yes, this could be the sponsor or the employer, but sometimes it's a separate entity. So this is the provider of that supplemental instruction that can be delivered by the sponsor employer, college, technical school, an intermediary, or any other third party provider during or after work hours. There are a lot of benefits to the employer to getting involved in registered apprenticeship. It is the opportunity for the employer to develop their future workforce. It's customized training for their business needs. Employers end up having higher retention and employee loyalty. There's a reduced cost of recruiting and hiring. They do have a savings because when they hire this employee, this apprentice, they're not paying them top dollar for what it is to be an electrician. They're paying them for the potential they have to become that electrician. There's decreased attrition rates and job hopping. There's a pipeline of more skilled applicants because as you train your apprentices, you're hopefully developing journey workers who will in return train the future workforce. And you have this continual cycle of training and learning and training. You have improved productivity and safety. There are ratios of apprentices to journey workers that are required in apprenticeship. And so that one ensures that the apprentice is learning the content and developing the skills, but it also ensures worker safety. There's potential eligibility for all kinds of grants. In Florida, we have the Pathways to Career Opportunities grant. There are also several federal grants. You at CareerSource probably know of other opportunities through CareerSource. With apprenticeship, you really have an enhanced workplace culture through mentorship. And your return on investment is $1.50 for every dollar invested in apprenticeship. Of course, there are many benefits to the apprentice. They're a full-time employee from day one with wages and benefits. They have the ability to earn while they learn instead of incurring debt, only to find out later that maybe this wasn't the occupation for them. They have scheduled wage increases. They can advance their career without that student loan debt. It's an established career pathway. They have that on-the-job training with their mentor or journey worker. There's also related technical instruction. Sometimes the related technical instruction is in the form of college credits. Sometimes the apprenticeship, just earning the apprenticeship can result in articulation agreements with local colleges and universities. So that's always an option for later on in the apprentice's career. It's an opportunity to start a new career, change careers, or upskill, and it's the ability to earn a nationally recognized credential. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about registering the apprenticeship and who can register. So a sponsor can be a committee, an employer or group of employees, or employers. It can be a group of employees, otherwise known as a union, an association, an educational institution, a local workforce board. We've got a few of those in Florida, a faith-based organization, or any combination of the above. And the sponsor's role, like I said before, is to be accountable for all the administration of all aspects of that program. And they provide periodic evaluation of apprentices' progress and make recommendations as appropriate. So the Florida Department of Education registers apprenticeship programs in Florida. We're the authorized entity on behalf of the U.S. Department of Labor to register the programs and the apprentices. And our apprenticeship training representatives work with the sponsor to develop and submit those standards for registration. And we also monitor the registered apprenticeship programs for compliance. So here's our path to success matrix for program registration. So we work with a lot of great apprenticeship navigators from CareerSource Florida. I think sometimes the field will get a little confused about like, wait a minute, is this, do I do this through CareerSource or FDOE? The answer is we work together. So a lot of times we get leads from CareerSource Florida. So step one is, someone's going to meet with an employer or sponsor, potential employer or sponsor. That could be the navigator or the ATR. Sometimes it's both of them. Then step two, when you meet with someone, you identify what is the occupation or the program that you're trying to register. Who's the RTI provider? What is the OJT going to, who's going to provide what? And is this occupation actually apprenticeable too? Then there's the development of that on-the-job training and related technical instruction content. And this is really where there's that handoff to the ATR. So a navigator, a lot of times they'll meet with an employer, explain what apprenticeship is, explain what those 5 components are, what is the occupation? You know, is this even an apprenticeable occupation? They may work with the ATR to see if there's something like it already and in the that's operating and running. But then there's a handoff to that ATR to develop that on-the-job training and related technical instruction. And it is really beneficial. I mean, like the ATR is going to be that program's point person moving forward anytime they register apprentices or they amend their programs. So there's going to be that ongoing relationship. Step 4, document development. There's 2 main documents that we use to register for apprenticeship, and that's the standards of apprenticeship and then the occupational appendix. And for every occupation that the program wants to train for, they would have one occupational appendix for that. And the ATR works with them on that. Those documents are posted on our website. We're actually testing out a very new system where we have this web-based portal, and that's all done online. And we'll be, our team will be talking with CareerSource in the coming months on that as it develops. So step 5, the ATR pre-approves the documents. Once, you know, the sponsor signs off on the documents and the ATR reviews them and everything's good to go, they pre-approve those. And then step 6, they submit those documents to me in Tallahassee, and I review them and approve them if everything's good. I register these in the federal database. And per rule, I have 90 days from when the time the ATR sends these to me to review. Usually it's a lot quicker. Usually I'm around 4 to 5 weeks, but it really depends on what's in the queue. And then the next step is, yeah, if there are any revisions, I just get back with the ATR. They may have to reach out to the sponsor for clarification on anything, but if everything's good, I register it in the federal database, send out the notification letters. I always copy Susan on these, and then she can share with whoever the navigator is for that local area. Step 7, we have the apprenticeship training representative does new program onboarding and training. They tell the sponsor, this is how you're going to report apprentices. This is what Rapids looks like. And this is what you do when you need to do an amendment and that sort of thing. Step 9, very important, provide workforce services. This is CareerSource 100%. I know a lot of our workforce boards have helped our sponsors in finding candidates. They've helped with career fairs, all kinds of great services. And step 10 is the ongoing servicing, monitoring, and compliance, which is done by the apprenticeship training representative. So some additional resources. This is a link to where you can find an Excel spreadsheet of all of our programs, and we update this about once a month. And so this would have the sponsor, the all the occupations that are trained for, and the contact information for each program. We are talking with CareerSource about here in Tallahassee about perhaps going to like a mapping tool for this. But right now it's in an Excel you can download, you can sort and filter and do all that fun stuff in Excel. We've got another link to just some general information about what is apprenticeship, and then also a link about the Pathways to Career Opportunities grant program. And now I will turn it over to Susan to talk about expanding registered apprenticeship.
Thank you, Catherine. And before you leave, we did have a quick question. We use a lot of acronyms in the state government, I guess. And someone wanted to know what an ATR actually stands for.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to spell that out. Apprenticeship Training Representative. So we have several around the state. For you, that would be the region 3, and that goes all the way from Nassau down to Flagler, out to Marion County, Levy, is that Levy? Yeah, up to Columbia County. So that whole northeastern region. I apologize. If anyone there are other questions, I'm happy to take those as long as Susan.
Yeah, I was going to say yes. Does anyone else have any questions? Catherine will be here through the end of the presentation, but if you have any questions specifically for her about the Florida Department of Education's significant role in expanding apprenticeship programs, now would be a perfect time. And then if not, we'll continue going then, Catherine, okay? And we can answer questions at the end. So just going back to the introductory slide that I have, really our role is helping to educate those employers across the state. And there's a variety of ways we do that. We hired, or you hired, we provided funding for an apprenticeship navigator at each of the local workforce boards to really be that expert in apprenticeships and be able to communicate that to employers. But then we realized that there are a lot of people at the local workforce boards, whether they work with employers or they work with career seekers, that really could benefit from understanding how registered apprenticeships work for both the employer and for the job seeker. As well as, leadership. Leadership is very active in the community, and they serve on many boards. And it would be really helpful for them for everyone to just have a general knowledge. With the goal, of course, is to help them understand the benefits, and then expand registered apprenticeships across the state. So how we have been helping with this goal of expanding registered apprenticeships to benefit the employers and the job seekers in our state is a variety of things. So I've mentioned many times that the CareerSource Florida Board supports the apprenticeship navigator roles at each of the local workforce boards. CareerSource Florida just recently revisited and rewrote the apprenticeship policy for the state's workforce system that was approved by the CareerSource Florida Board of Directors last year. So if that's something that you would like to learn more about and view that apprenticeship policy, if you haven't already, that is on the CareerSource Florida website. Or if anyone would like, I could put that in the chat box as well. We do provide ongoing support for training the apprenticeship navigators. Oh, I'm sorry. We do provide training for the apprenticeship navigators. And I wanted to mention that because not only are we doing that right now, but some of our apprenticeship navigators have actually gotten together, and now they are providing training for other workforce boards, apprenticeship navigators. And Doreen is one of those people that work together outside of what we're doing here at CareerSource Florida to really help expand the knowledge base and introduce and mentor new apprenticeship navigators. So we appreciate that. But we do provide training for support and training for apprentices. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that later. Some of our boards, as Catherine mentioned, are actual sponsors of apprenticeship programs. Sometimes the occupation and the job is actually at the local workforce boards. So they have an apprenticeship program specifically that they will use to train their employees. Other workforce boards will sponsor programs for outside employers. So for example, CareerSource Suncoast in Sarasota is the sponsor of multiple programs for several employers, as are a few other of our our CareerSource boards across the state. So that's something we can do to really help employers utilize this apprenticeship model. Of course, we recruit job seekers and apprentices, and that's a really important component. And I know you guys do a really great job of that with hiring events and job fairs specific to the apprentices. And then Catherine mentioned that sometimes the employer doesn't even have to be the sponsor of a program. We can actually connect an employer to an existing program. So, and I often start with this when I'm talking to an employer because it's sometimes the easiest and quickest way for them to get involved with using an apprenticeship program is to connect them to an existing sponsored program already. So those are some of the things that we could do to support the expansion of apprenticeship programs. I'm going to skim through some of these slides. These are things that probably, if you're in employer services or even in leadership roles in your local workforce board, these are some of the things that you do maybe on a daily or weekly basis. And this is just outreach and education into your community. But I wanted to point out the types of ways that you could help introduce the idea of using apprenticeships as a talent development solution for employers, and of course, as a great career advancement and career pathway tool for apprentices. So these are just some of the places that you're probably visiting every day, or you're probably visiting all the time. But when you do visit them in the future, think about, have you talked to the members of your Chamber of Commerce about apprenticeships? Have you, talked to your youth groups and your students about becoming an apprentice? So that's just some tips on how you can reach out and share information about apprenticeships. So your apprenticeship training representative is Doreen, and I'm just going to say that these are some of the things that Doreen does on a regular basis. She does meet regularly with that ATR or that apprenticeship training representative, and Catherine happens to be filling in right now for that region. These are things that we really don't want all of the business services people to feel like they have to reach out to the ATR. That's kind of Doreen's role. So she'll meet with the apprenticeship training representative regularly. She'll ask about any existing sponsorship programs that might be looking to connect new employers to the program. She will ask about employers looking for apprentices. That's one way we can really help. It is to find some of those perfect candidates. And one of the nice things about an apprenticeship model and hiring apprentices is that you don't always have to find the candidate that is perfectly employed. In fact, perfectly skilled. In fact, you're really not going to put a perfectly skilled person into an apprenticeship program. You're going to be able to choose from a much larger pool of candidates because the employer understands that they're not going to be hiring someone for the existing skills and education they have. They're going to be hiring someone that has the capabilities to learn the job and do the job under the advisement and of a mentor or a journey worker. So it really helps you help those individuals that you're trying to find jobs for. It helps you really open up that pool so you can look at more diverse populations. You can look at more youth populations. So there's a lot more. It really opens up the ability for an employer to find a candidate because they know they're going to train that candidate. And then Doreen will ask about new programs and new occupations. So she's aware of what's going on in your region. There isn't always a program in your region that already exists. So in some cases, if an employer came to you tomorrow and said, hey, I really need to hire and train some new surgical techs, we can utilize the apprenticeship model to train surgical techs, but we have to either create that program or find a program that already exists. So she will help with a lot of those things. So a lot of you, and actually, we didn't really ask, and we sometimes do this. How many? Just raise your hand if you want to. If you work directly with employers, that you're on the business services side in any way, shape, or form. Because this next slide is a little bit about what your role is and how you can help and your department can help with expanding apprenticeships. So these are just some ways of connecting employers to programs. So when you meet with employers, you probably sometimes will hear them say, we need these, we need people that have these specific skills for this particular occupation or occupations. So when you're really struggling, or when they're really struggling to find candidates that are fully trained and skilled for these particular roles, that's a good time when you can say to them, well, if we can't find the candidate, maybe we can create the candidate for you using the apprenticeship model. Let me just check really quick. I think I saw, okay, good. Melissa, I think you asked a couple questions. Okay, I'll look at those in a second. I'll go through this slide and then I'll look at your questions. So we also want to make sure that the employer has a fairly good understanding of what a registered apprenticeship is. And we'll share this presentation with you. And when Catherine talked about employer benefits, that's a good place to start. These are the things that will really are beneficial to the employer. But just having an understanding of what it is, how it works, what the commitment is, employers like, employers oftentimes would really like it if you could just find them the perfect candidate who had all the skills and all the knowledge and the background and everything, the education and everything, this perfect little candidate, so they could hire them tomorrow and they could start working tomorrow. But we all know that when we have a low unemployment rate, which we have, it's not always easy to find the perfect candidate for the employer. So that's when we really want to start talking to the employer about, well, what if you could train the employer? What if we were to assist you in helping you find someone who didn't really have all the skill sets, but within a year time, within a year's period of time, or we could help you to bring that person up to speed. And then maybe when that person is finished with their apprenticeship program, they can actually be the mentor for the next group of apprentices that you want to hire. So you want to understand, you want to help them understand what an apprenticeship is and how it works. And we talked a little bit about identifying, discussing specific occupations. Let me just be clear that an apprenticeship is really a long-term talent development solution. So the employer has to understand you're not going to hire the person tomorrow and, on Monday, they're going to be fully ready to do the job. It's going to take at least a year, right? Catherine mentioned there's 144 hours of related instruction, and then there's at least 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. So we want to make it clear to them that this is not a short-term fix. This isn't even really what we would classify if you were to use OJT. It's not something you can train someone to do within 6 months either. It really is at least a year-long commitment. And I like to make sure that we use certain terminology when we talk to employers about apprenticeships. There is a cost to them, but I don't like to say cost. I like to say investment. So they are investing in their talent by providing them with this apprenticeship opportunity where they're going to learn while they're on the job under the direction of a mentor who is fully trained and works there. And they're going to be provided with additional technical instruction. So these are terms that, sometimes it's hard for a business to understand that they have to invest in their workforce talent, right, in order to have the talent that they really need to be successful. Review existing statewide registered apprenticeships with the employer for that specific occupation. And Doreen does this really well, but oftentimes when I have an employer come to me and ask me about an apprenticeship program, I usually do look to see if there's an existing program that we can connect them to. It's just a little bit easier, like I mentioned earlier. The Department of Education's apprenticeship training representative has a copy of the specific standards and appendix. Catherine mentioned when she approves a new program in the state of Florida, I typically will send that to the apprenticeship navigator in that region so that they can start working with that employer and that program to help recruiting, to help with maybe some supportive services or some training services, and then facilitate meeting with registered apprenticeship sponsor and the employer. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I will find an employer that's interested and I know of a sponsor that's already doing this, and I'll connect the two of them. That's probably something, if you find an employer that's very interested in reaching out to an existing sponsor, that's probably something you would have Doreen connect them to. So let me just take a quick second, because I think, Melissa, you had a few questions and I want to read them. And if I don't get it right, maybe you could just hop on and clarify. So a question that you asked was, when staff refer a job seeker to an apprenticeship, which employ Florida codes should they engage? That's a really good question. And we have these codes outlined very clearly in the notice of funding for the apprenticeship navigators. So that document, I will try to attach that. I don't know if everyone has access to chat, but how about if I share that with you, Melissa, because I know Doreen's not in. I'll share that with you, and then you can share that with the team, because it's really important. And we just actually met with Commerce within the last, 6 to 8 months. And we sat down with them and told them, these are the codes we want to use so that we can accurately take account of the work that we're doing to support apprenticeships. So there's like 3 or 4 employer codes, and then there are 3 or 4 career seeker codes that we are definitely tracking. And then you guys can use whatever other codes you typically use, but there's several that we're going to use. So that's a great question. Thank you. Is the apprenticeship the same as on-the-job training? Another great question. On-the-job training is a component of the apprenticeship program. And I'll talk about this a little bit in a few minutes with a little more detail. But when Catherine talked about the actual components of a registered apprenticeship, you might remember that she mentioned the related technical instruction. That is at least 144 hours of either classroom training, some sort of formal education, whether it's online training or even the employer might be providing that technical training on premises or themselves. That it would be considered, and that could be paid for actually using WIOA funding through the individual training account. So any registered apprenticeship program is automatically eligible to be added to the statewide ETPL list. So that means if they choose to opt in, they are automatically included. And that means that any workforce board across the state can support the related instruction through an ITA. But Melissa's questions about OJT. OJT is a component of an apprenticeship program. So that related, not the related instruction, but the on-the-job learning component, which is that 2,000 hours minimum, that would be, that is what we would consider and could support using OJT funding. So I think that's what your question is, Melissa. If not, let me know. The next question is, are apprenticeships new hires or can they be existing employees? Excellent question. Registered apprenticeships are great for both new employees and existing employees. And I really like the idea of using it for an existing employee because it really can be a tool to help employees demonstrate their value to the employer, right? Which tends to lead to more loyal employees, right? So a lot of times in healthcare, we'll say to a healthcare employer, you really need surge techs, right? And here we could look for new people to learn how to become surgical techs through the apprenticeship program, or we could look at some of those people that already work for your organization. Like there might be some very loyal long-term employees that are very, interested in career advancement. They might be working in food service, or they might be working, in another department, and they just want to make a change. So utilizing apprenticeships to upskill existing workers is a fantastic tool. So that's a great question. And when you talk to your employers, always be aware that an apprenticeship can be a great tool to train and upskill those existing workers. We would love that. And I'm sure a lot of those job seekers would love that as well. Or not job seekers, I'm sorry, those current employees. So what is an apprentice's financial responsibility during an apprenticeship, or can an employer require an apprentice to pay for training? And I'm gonna say, Catherine will correct me if I'm wrong on this, but an apprentice does not pay for the training component. Is that correct, Catherine? Or I don't know if I'm not sure if she heard me, but
I did hear you. I did hear you.
Okay.
I was trying to turn off my microphone again. The question was,
so what is the apprentice's financial responsibility during an apprenticeship, or can an employer require an apprentice to pay for training?
so if the training is credit training provided through a local education agency, there is no tuition and fees assessed. Colleges, public colleges, universities, and school districts cannot assess tuition and fees for apprentices or pre-apprentices. I know sometimes our colleges may have workforce development programs that are not credit bearing, and they may charge fees. Well, they typically do. They typically do charge significant fees for those. I do know that our workforce boards have been able to assist with those costs for those programs that do. private providers, they can assess tuition and fees. But because we have local education agencies that cannot assess tuition and fees, and we do have a lot of activity in those kinds of programs, I think that it's a compelling argument for private entities to either not assess tuition and fees or keep those fees very reasonable. Like Susan always says, it's an investment in your workforce, not you know, you're not just gonna, make money off of it. Susan, you're muted.
Thank you for letting me know. So the apprentice could potentially, if they were not going to a local education, I'm sorry, if they weren't going to like a college for their training, could be asked to pay for the training.
It is possible. It
Okay.
is possible.
And that is one component that we could help them pay for if they qualify, right? They still have to qualify, but we could use an ITA to help with that. So, all right, those are great questions. Thank you, Melissa. We'll continue going on. So what makes a good employer candidate? I think one of the things that Catherine and her team would really, or really do appreciate is that we don't just send every employer that asks about an apprenticeship program over to them. And I know I field calls from employers all the time, as do the apprenticeship navigators. And what we do is we really try to determine whether this employer truly could benefit from an apprenticeship program, which again is a long-term training solution. Or could they just get by with something a little bit quicker and shorter? I know you guys use a lot of customized training. So before I talk to an employer about becoming an apprentice, there might be some solutions that are a little bit quicker that we might be able to assist them with. But anyway, here are some of the keys that you'll want to look for to determine whether the employer is prepared to enter into this commitment of becoming an apprenticeship sponsor or joining an existing program. So they must have a true concern for training and retaining a skilled workforce. You'll see that sometimes they already have training plans in place that they utilize. So really, having that understanding that if I want to be successful with my company, I know I have to train and retain my employees, right? So they have to have a true concern for that. Again, they're looking for long-term solutions. They're not looking for someone to start and be fully qualified within a couple of weeks, because that's just not really how the process works. Another great thing to look at are some of those employers that have a very large number of people who are maybe in the process of, planning their retirement in the next 5 to 10 years. You have a lot of, especially, and this happens a lot in the skilled trades as well, where you've got someone who's been doing this job for 20, 30 years. And before they leave, it would be so nice if they could transfer some of the skills they've acquired over those years to a new generation of workers, right? So if you hear employers talking about, I don't know what I'm going to do, my key employees are going to be retiring soon, or that might be a good opportunity to kind of get them interested in an apprenticeship program while they're still there. We mentioned this multiple times. It is a long-term commitment. They must embrace an organizational culture of apprenticeship. And what I often look for is not that the HR director is all for apprenticeships, right? We want to make sure that the CEO is on board, the senior level leadership is on board with an apprenticeship program, and even those people that are going to be mentors, because they play such a key role. So when you talk to an employer, you really want to understand that the entire team is on board. Everyone from top to bottom is thinking this is a great way to, develop our future talent. And then, last but not least, you are probably all aware that sometimes, people are looking for grant money or grant funding or support from our boards because they want to help pay for their training. That's fine. We can do that, and we encourage that with apprenticeships. But that can't be the main reason that they're thinking of doing this, because they know they might get some funding to support it. So you'll just kind of have to be kind of clear on the fact that we really want to make sure that you have this plan for sustaining the program even after we might be able to support you with some funding. So that is a few things. We also have an employer checklist, and it really just kind of identifies, if the employer has these, 30 things in place already, they might be a much better candidate for an apprenticeship program. So again, we don't want to send everyone over to the apprenticeship training representative because they may not be ready yet. We like to work with them multiple times before we send them over to the apprenticeship training representative. And I like to give examples of this because Catherine mentioned that she has only 90 days to get this apprenticeship, these standards approved. But sometimes it takes years to get an apprenticeship program up and running, not because of anything that the Department of Education is doing, but because it sometimes takes a really long time for the employer to agree with this or to have it go through the multiple channels or through their legal teams. Sometimes we don't know who the training provider is going to be. Sometimes we don't know who the sponsor is going to be. A really great example of this is that I believe it was about 1.5 to 2 years. It took 1.5 to 2 years to get the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association Sheriff's Deputy Registered Apprenticeship program started. So I met with them, and CareerSource Chipola actually brought them to the table. So a group of us got together with a training provider and one of the sheriff's departments and CareerSource and our organization in Florida Department of Education, and we all met. And then, we talk about apprenticeships, and then they'd go back and they'd talk, amongst themselves. And then a few months later, we'd have another meeting, or a few weeks later. And this kind of went on until they actually figured out like who's going to be the sponsor, who's going to be the training provider, how is this going to work? And then eventually they all got that, those standards written, and Catherine's office approved them. And now they're an existing program that can work with employers across the state of Florida. So business and apprentice leads, these are just some tools that we use, and the apprenticeship navigators are very familiar with these tools. But if these are things that might be of benefit to you, I'm more than happy to share some of these things. We do have leads that come in from social media and from our Apprentice Florida website. So an employer can fill out a document on the Apprentice Florida website requesting additional information about apprenticeships. They fill out that form on the Apprentice Florida website. They start getting a series of 4 emails, one each week for the next 4 weeks, that just gives them a little bit more information about apprenticeships. They have an opportunity to email me directly. But they also get populated into our Salesforce platform under Apprentice Florida Leads. And those are businesses that have an interest because they've expressed an interest in learning more about apprenticeships. So Doreen can look up that list and she can call those employers and just say, I see that you had some interest in an apprenticeship. Would you like to meet with me? We could talk more about it. Let's see, and Doreen does a lot. I know Doreen does a lot of these things. So she emails job seekers and employers, and the Apprentice Florida website actually has a toolkit for the local workforce boards. So if you go to Apprentice Florida website and go to resources, you will see there are toolkits for employers. There's a toolkit for education providers, and there's a toolkit for the CareerSource Florida network. Work with your business services teams, and a lot of you raised your hand that you are part of the business services teams. If you hear, start working with an employer, introduce them to the idea of apprenticeships, and they're definitely interested, and you want to move them over to Doreen, maybe have a meeting with Doreen and them, and she will kind of, evaluate them a little further. Review weekly job orders. These are other things that you guys can do to increase the number of apprenticeship opportunities in your region. Update your website to include information about apprenticeships, track leads, follow up on leads, and then enter the Employ Florida case notes as requested, and which I'm going to share with you all. And these are some reasons that a local workforce board like your board might want to determine that being a sponsor of a registered apprenticeship program might be beneficial to the employers that you're working with. So again, these are some of the reasons that anyone would really start an apprenticeship opportunity, but it helps the employer develop tailored workforce solutions such as customized training, industry-driven curricula. increased funding opportunities, access to grants and resources, such as potentially the Pathways to Career Opportunities grants, enhance employer engagement, helps build very strong relationships with and partnerships with your employers if you're helping them with their talent development needs and in utilizing an apprenticeship. And then just a few other things like economic impact, improved workforce metrics, and sustainability and scalability. Remember that when you help an apprentice get into an apprenticeship program, that is a job from day one. So you are not only getting someone a job immediately, but you're providing them with upskilling because they're going to learn additional skills. They're going to end up with at least a certification as an apprenticeship graduate, right? But there may be additional certifications that they receive as part of that apprenticeship program. So it's really a great way to help your apprentice, your job seekers. So what does the sponsorship entail? Just quickly, developing and customizing program standards with the employer, working with the ATR, registering apprentices, maintaining program and apprentice records. These are some of the things that Catherine talked about earlier in the presentation. Ensuring RTI provisions and compliance with EEO. And we can go into more detail at some future time if that is something that you're interested. We'll bring Catherine in to help facilitate some of that, or the ATR for your region. So one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that if we're going to support the expansion of apprenticeships, we really want to try to play a role in helping to support the apprentices themselves. And there are a variety of ways that we can support them, but there are specifically 3 components of the registered apprenticeship program that we really want to, and if you go back to that apprenticeship policy, we're really asking the local boards to be very flexible in supporting registered apprenticeship programs. So there are 3 specific ways that we can help. One is the work-based training or work-based learning, the on-the-job learning component of that registered apprenticeship program can be funded. And I know you guys don't typically use an OJT, but it can typically be funded through OJT, customized training, or IWT. We do have some existing, and again, you guys, I guess, don't use OJT, but we actually have some registered apprenticeship, we actually have some local workforce boards that will provide an OJT, which is typically for new hires, right? They will provide an OJT to support the on-the-job learning component, even for an existing employee. So that's helpful, right, to the employer and to the apprentice. But as you work with employers in your region, think about ways that you can utilize the funding that you have to assist them with supporting the on-the-job learning component of the registered apprenticeship program. We mentioned this a couple times, that classroom training or related instruction, as we call it in the apprenticeship world, that can be funded through individual training accounts. And again, we don't ask them to join our ETPL list because they're already on. If they've opted in, they are already on the eligible training provider list. And all of that is done actually directly with Florida Commerce now. So if you get an apprenticeship sponsor, which Doreen would get, she would introduce them to the ETPL process that Florida Commerce has. And then one of the other really super important things we want to be able to provide, if we can, is funds to support the apprentice while they're going through this program. Remember, we talk a lot about investment. The employer is investing time and energy and training and money to train this apprentice, right? And we really want to make sure that this apprentice is going to be secure in their pathway on this career journey, right? This career pathway. But sometimes things get in the way. Sometimes they don't have the funding for things like maybe tools or equipment to be successful in the apprenticeship program. Sometimes they lose their transportation and don't have funding to go out and get new transportation. So what we really want to do is we want to support that apprentice in any way we can so that they don't come across some sort of situation that's going to make them have to drop out of this apprenticeship program, right? We want them to start it. We want them to be successful while they're in it. We want them to finish it. Remember, this is a job for them, but also this is a career advancement opportunity in most cases. So we want to be able to do whatever we can do to provide supportive services. And specifically, right now, we actually have a set aside funding that was set aside specifically for the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association's Registered Apprenticeship Program. And Doreen is aware of this, but if any of you are working with the Sheriff's Department in your region and they are interested in doing an apprenticeship program, we actually have some additional funding set aside specifically for those supportive services. And for that program, the request was specific to the cost of uniforms. So apparently, I don't know exactly what the cost of uniforms is, but that was a burden on these apprentices. Apparently, it was very difficult for them to come up with the funding to pay for these uniforms. So the WIOA funding can be used for things like helping them with their uniform costs if they qualify. All right, I think I'm done there. I know that was a lot of stuff, and I know that we have a lot of people on the call today, but I think Catherine and I are both happy to answer any questions that anyone might have or any sort of clarifications that we can make. So does anyone have any questions at this point? And while we're waiting maybe for someone to raise a hand, Melissa, I'm going to ask you, can I just share some of the materials? I'm not sure everyone has access to the chat. So if you don't mind, I might just share the policy with you and I'll share the NFA with you so you can share those codes with your teams.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that they get out to the teams. Doreen will take care of it.
Perfect.
Thanks, Susan.
You are welcome. Well, I just want to say thank all of you for taking time on your Friday to learn just a little bit more about apprenticeships. I apologize, some of it may be very repetitive for some of you, but I think it's a great way for us to really, just help our employers and our job seekers across the state with some new tools, right? That might just be the perfect fit for some of them. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for all you do on a regular basis, not only to support apprenticeships, but just to support the workforce and the employers across your region. And if you have any questions, I will send the presentation. And I see my email address is not on there, but I think it's on the next slide. That's right. Catherine and I have our contact information. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes. If y'all have any questions you want to reach out to us directly, please feel free to. I'll share this presentation as well. And just want to say thank you all for joining us and have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Yeah, thank you. Frederica, did you have a question?